What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the words Snow White? It's the dwarves, isn't it? You're like trying to remember their names. Fun fact, the dwarves supposedly did not have names until the 1912 Broadway show, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And those names were different than in the 1937 animated film version. Is that what you thought of? Did you think of the movie? Or did you think of that other movie? Or did you think about 1,000 angry YouTubers screaming about all of the above? Well, if you're a mythology and folklore nerd like me, maybe you thought of the Grimm's brothers and the original folktale Little Snow White. Allow me to digress for just a moment. I have here the original folk and fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm, edited by Jack Zipes. And in here you can find the original Schneewittchen, or Little Snow White. Not to be confused with Schneewittchen und Rosenrot, also known as Snow White and Rose Red, as you can see here in a wonderful sculpture by Sean Tan from his book The Singing Bones. Sean Tan also has an incredible sculpture of Snow White. Well, the sculpture's not of Snow White, but as you can see here, the Furious Queen. Terrifying. Usually when I do these Tsundoku videos, I save all my recommendations until the end of the video, but in this one I decided to change it up a little bit, and I thought, I'll just do the recommendations first. There are so many wonderful tales in this book, from Rapunzel to Cinderella to Little Red Riding Hood to Schneewittchen to just on, and there's a wonderful introduction by Jack Zipes, talking about the history and quoting from the Grimms themselves, their letters. This is a complete translation of their work, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in where Snow White came from and why do we still care. Another recommendation for all you mythology, folklore, and fairy tale nerds out there is The Oxford Companion to Fairy Tales, also edited by Jack Zipes, same guy. And in here there is an incredible passage dealing with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, giving as much of the history as it can possibly give in such a short time. It takes up a couple pages. I found this interesting here at the end. Like all great classical fairy tales, Snow White has undergone numerous literary transformations in the 19th and 20th centuries. And it talks about some of the films there, and then it actually says, see burlesque fairy tale films. Burlesque fairy tale films? In an important literary study, Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar used the fairy tale as a theoretical paradigm about how 19th century literature depicted older women being pitted against younger women within the framework of a male mirror and were driven mad. You can not only read about the fairy tales and about fairy tales from all over the world, but you can also find these people who are doing these studies and people who adapted them into movies, and it's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Back to my original question. What comes to mind when you hear the words Snow White? Well, as much as I love ultraviolet fairy tales and folklore and mythology, I also love adaptation. I love reinterpretation, when characters are taken out of the old tales and they're made new again in some other medium. And so today, I want to tell you about what I think of when I hear the words Snow White. The first thing that comes to mind is the deputy mayor of Fabletown. That's right, Fables by Bill Willingham. It might sound kind of funny to you if I say Snow White is one of my favorite characters, but trust me, if you read even a little bit of this 2003 series by Bill Willingham, and you put the baggage aside and put the giant mega corporation version of Snow White aside, I think you might agree that she is one of the most interesting and dynamic characters in a very unexpectedly great comic. I just want to make a quick note here to say that this video is not about the comic so much as about the character of Snow White, so I'm purposefully leaving out a bunch of information because I just want to focus on her character strictly. So why do I love this version of Snow White so much? Well, She begins as a hard-working, if slightly out-of-touch bureaucrat. She's the deputy mayor of Fabletown, which is an area of New York City where the magical beings of folklore live, quietly, among but unbeknownst to the humans around them. True to her nature, Snow is very pure and has her ideals, but she has been and continues to be used and taken advantage of by those around her. For example, the mayor of Fabletown. That is actually old King Cole. So here you can see Beauty and the Beast, and the Beast's curse has come back because Beauty, every time Beauty gets angry at her husband, he begins to look beast-like again. And then when they're in love, he can look more like a man. And so they're sort of telling their troubles to Snow White, who is losing her patience with them. And she's describing how Fabletown does not have enough funds to help them out, to pay one of the witches to give them some kind of glamour to conceal his monstrous form, and so on. And then the Beast says, "But you aren't really the mayor." "True, I'm not the mayor of Fabletown, only his deputy. And if you want to make an appointment to tell your tale of woe directly to King Cole, that's your prerogative. But I'll tell you right now what will happen. He'll listen to you and make all the right noises about how sorry he is for your plight. And his sympathy will be genuine, because he's a wonderful, empathetic man. And then, the moment you're out the door, he'll ask me what I want to do about it, because that's how we work. He does all the formal glad-handing, he makes the official appearances and hosts the ceremonial functions, and I do the real work of running our community. For better or worse, you've just had your appeal to City Hall." And then Beauty starts to sort of personally attack Snow White. "You divorced your prince centuries ago. You have no idea how hard it is to keep a marriage going so long." Of course, fables are essentially eternal beings. "Now, dear, there's no reason to get personal." "Don't get personal. After she openly criticized our married life? I did no such thing. And just who is she to criticize anyone's personal life, after what I heard about her tawdry little adventure with those 7 dwarves?" And then Snow White gives her the death stare. And then Little Boy Blue comes up. "Thank you both for coming in. Our door is always open. But we weren't finished." "Yes, you were, ma'am. Assuming you hope to survive your last comment. Take my advice. Some topics are best never brought up. Never discuss personal hygiene with a bridge troll. Never trade casserole recipes with a Black Forest witch. But above all, when talking to the deputy mayor, never mention the dwarves. Goodbye, Miss Beauty. Mr. Beast, take care now." And then here we see the Big Bad Wolf in human form. He is known as Bigby Wolf. And he'll play a major role not only in this story, but in the entire run of Fables. Quick background note on Snow White. She divorced Prince Charming long ago, and in this story, his arrival back in Fabletown causes her nothing but stress and grief. She also has a sister, Rose Red, from the old, Grimm's Brothers collected tales. Schneewittchen und Rosenrot. And Rose Red is the kind of wild child sister. She's a rebel, and she thinks that Snow White has a stick up her ass, and they don't get along, even though when they were children they used to be very close. So all of the feelings that Snow White has kept carefully bottled up over decades and, in fact, centuries, all start to come out. Feelings about her ex-husband, estranged Prince Charming, her estranged sister, Rose Red, all of these things start to come up to the surface as she joins this murder investigation. And she and Sheriff Bigby Wolf will investigate the presumed murder of her sister, Rose Red. And Rose Red's body has not been found, but there's a ton of blood, and they will begin their murder investigation. And so Snow White's calm and kind of pretentious and cold demeanor will slowly slip away, and we will get to know who she really is. Over the course of the first 33 issues, or about 850 pages, we will see Snow White go through many dramatic situations that change her and affect her deeply. So that by the time the issue, The Long Year, ends, we feel like we've seen a full character arc of many ups and downs, sacrifices, loves lost and found. And I found it to be very satisfying. Don't worry, The Long Year is not the conclusion of Snow White's story. She will come back many times throughout Fables, and actually there's even like a spin-off that's 1001 Nights of Snowfall, where Snow White is essentially Scheherazade, telling the tales of like the Arabian Nights. I like this interpretation of Snow White because she's dynamic, even though she doesn't seem to be at first, and we as readers get to discover what she's capable of along her many adventures. I like how she's bossy and uptight and saying things like no and never, even though she'll then go back on them many times. She'll contradict herself and question her own motives, her own sense of who she is, and she'll find an inner strength to rise to the challenge when it's called for. These inconsistencies are not at all the writer Bill Willingham's fault. In fact, they are to his credit. He takes a lofty fairy tale character who you think you might know all about, who you might perceive as old-fashioned or one-dimensional, and he humanizes her. We feel we know her even at the beginning. As I mentioned, the cold, loftier-than-thou bureaucrat, easily irritated, and yet doing her best in a rather thankless position. All of this played into my impression of what Snow White might be like in reality. And then, issue by issue, Willingham reveals little by little her thoughts, her feelings, her uneasiness with herself. She's cold because she's got walls up. She's got walls up because she's been taken advantage of and manipulated by everyone around her. And only after living through a hell of a lot of trouble, even a near-death experience that leaves her in a wheelchair, does she start to take a look at her life and situation and change for the better. Who knows? If you read her story, you might just form a different opinion of Snow White as a character. It's worth a shot. I'm Chris Crescent. This has been Talking Sandoka Blues. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again.